everybody, on this beautiful spring day to Book Chat with Assisting Hands Home Care. I am Patricia Dubroof, and I have the pleasure of welcoming Lauren Francis-Sharma. And I just noticed a typo, so I apologize for that, Lauren. I'll fix it. I wanted to mention that the reason that Assisting Hands Home Care delves into Book Chat is because we feel so strongly about the benefits of arts and healing as we age, actually at any age, but especially as we're getting older and we're looking for ways to add to our social portfolio, which would include creativity. Doses of creativity are free and you can self-prescribe. So we encourage you to take advantage of things like Book Chat, making art, going out to listen to music, as it is safer to do with our experiences through COVID. And we just want to make sure that everybody who connects with us at Assisting Hands Home Care also understands that we value artists and we think very highly of them. And we know that their work is what really keeps our spirit going. When all else fails, we can reach back to a poem or a sound of music or a yoga pose and go, okay, I'm grounded again. I can begin again. And believe me, in these past few years, we've all gone through a lot of regrounding. So I'm very happy to share today's book chat with Lauren Francis-Sharma, who has written Till the Well Runs Dry, a beautiful story of her family's process of coming to America and not, but we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. So as I have learned, just like our owner, Steve Lorberbaum, who's a recovering attorney, went into home care, Lauren is a recovering attorney who's become a novelist. So Lauren, welcome, and tell us a little bit about how that transition happened.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, and to all of you for coming in and sitting in what's I think turning into a slightly sunny Monday afternoon. Yeah, how did that happen? It's actually by accident, and I shouldn't say it quite like that, but because when you're creating your story, you don't want to make it sound like things sort of happened by accident, but in some respects it did. I wanted to be a writer, when I was younger, and I think I was very clear that my parents would be unforgiving if I decided to do something that would guarantee me to be to make no money. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll set my sights on the law. So I did. I actually went straight ahead from sort of college to law school and really enjoyed the learning of the law part. And then when I ended up working at a really big law firm in New York City and being incredibly unhappy. And I decided, oh, well, my unhappiness is about New York. It's not about the law. So I moved back home to Maryland, taking another sort of big law firm position in DC, and I was still unhappy. And I was like, oh gosh, wow. So I moved to another job, and I was less unhappy, but still like, I don't know, I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm 10 years in and I'm not really sure I'm loving this whole lawyer thing. But I ended up having my first child and then my second child sort of, with like 2 years between them. And when the second child came along, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna take some time off and get this second kid off to sort of, the earliest possible pre-primary care that I can get her to. And this was back in 2007, I think, or so, 2008. And when I took the time off, I was really struggling with sort of not working and outside of the home and just being sort of a caregiver. So I began to sort of write this novel, actually, the same one that we're talking about today. And it was not my first time trying to write a novel. It was just my first time with more time on my hands. So I think that probably explains why this one ended up being more successful.
Well, we're really glad you took this leap and found yourself. I know as women, we're expected to do so many things all really well and all at the same time. Oh, sure, you can write a book while you're caring for two small children. What's the big deal? You'll have all that time at home. Yeah, 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 yeah. We all know that's crazy making as a mom who is an artist who stayed home with my kids too. But it does, sort of nurture your inner side. And clearly this book, which is a lot about mothers and children, tell us where this, the seed for this story came from.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you actually said the last thing the first thing that you said, which was about time, because I actually had to ask my sister to watch my kids when I took a class at the Bethesda Writer Center every Tuesday night to be able to sort of start this book. So I'm really glad you reminded me of that, because it was not that I was like sitting at home trying to get it done. I had to have some structure around this. But as I was sitting there, I just sort of come off a very tough time. My grandmother, she'd gotten very sick, and I remember rushing. My kid might have been like 7 months old, my second child, and we rushed to sort of her bedside at the hospital. And she'd been sort of living by herself and self-sufficient, and I was sitting next to her at the hospital, in the hospital room, and I was thinking, oh no, I've spent all this time sort of with her and never really asked her anything about her life, why she came to the U.S. and what happened to her back home, and why she never really wanted to go back to Trinidad. I mean, there were all these questions, and I thought to myself, I may never get to ask her. I really, really felt an incredible amount of regret. So this sort of desire to kind of create some links between the facts that I knew, came from that moment. But I thought to myself, well, Lauren, you've already failed at this whole writing endeavor. You really should stop. You got kids, you got to go back to practicing law. But I ended up having to go to Trinidad for another family member's funeral. And while we were there, I ended up going to the little town, which I write about in this book, called Blanchishez, which is where my grandmother grew up. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, oh wow, this is where she came from. I wonder what life was like for her here. And that really got my juices flowing. So when I got back home, I continued going back to the Bethesda Writer Center, and this book just sort of started to bloom there. But it was really about my need to fill in these gaps about my grandmother.
Yeah, I mean, family legacy stories can be very fruitful, as we've seen from so many other writers. And this is a very interesting story. I don't know that many books written about Trinidadians. I know the Caribbean from my family's living there off and on over many years, and never really knew that much about Trinidad, and certainly didn't connect the East Indian experience and the food cuisine. I think one of the things that Lauren does really well in this book is whets your appetite. I couldn't get through a chapter without wanting to go find these recipes. And then sure enough, in this edition that I have, the recipes are in the back, which was super helpful to me. But, I like a book that hits me at all my senses. There's the reading part, there's the take me away into this other world. There's the, you could smell the food cooking, the ocean, lapping the shores. All those pieces were very clear. And I really like that about your writing. It's very visceral in that way. And there were some very difficult things going on in this book. So it was, sharing difficult times.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. Yeah. I wonder, sometimes if that had to do with sort of growing up as a latchkey kid and watching an enormous amount of television. when when I was a kid, there was no such thing as like, TV timeout. It was just, we just watched television constantly. And I think I'm a very visual writer from having watched a lot of television shows and movies. I'm sort of, I guess I'm considered Gen X, right? Born in sort of early 70s. So you remember, like, we started off with sort of black and white television, and then the whole boom of sort of cable, and everything started at that point. The real sort of media boom, so to speak. But I very much enjoy reading books that take me to different worlds and fully immersive, where every sense is sort of implicated. And that was really my goal for this book, um, was to make you feel what it would have been like for someone, from a very small island where no one's ever heard of, to show up in America, on a hope and a dream, and see if they could make it. It was a good way for me to sort of understand what my grandmother, who was a very sort of reserved, and I would even say shy person, had to do in order to sort of leave her children behind and come here and do what she did. So much of my life, as it is today, is because of you know that sort of courage that it took to do that. And so I really wanted readers to feel that, the loss that she experienced, and also, the hopefulness, and how
Yeah.
coming to America is not always, it's not always the fantastical adventure that people
The-
think it will be, right?
Right. Her entry was more like human trafficking than anything
Yeah,
else.
right.
It wasn't about, she wasn't, hopefully didn't have to deal with the sexual aspect, but definitely she was totally abused for her talent as a seamstress.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many stories of family and friends are woven into this novel. It is a novel, it's not a documentary, but you don't lay it on so heavy that it's not believable. It's like there may have been many stories overlapped, or maybe this is just all her story, which would be really scary to me too. But I also like the way you tell the story from several different voices, and you're able to change your voice as an exceptional writer that you are, so that we hear the different, you're writing from the view of your grandmother, you're writing from the view of her husband, from her daughters. I think even her son has a chapter in there, and it's that telling from all sides. It's almost like opening up a 360-degree diorama. You're kind of seeing the whole world around her, not just the way she sees it.
Yeah, thanks. It wasn't intended, I have to say. Like I would not wish a multi-narrative book on any person ever. Like
Well, you do
writing,
it really well, so it
right?
looked really simple to me.
It's right, like writing three separate novels. You have to sort of take the arc of every character, a whole emotional arc of every character who you decided to sort of put the lens with. But Marcia, who is the protagonist of this book, is a very private woman. She keeps a lot of secrets, and secrets sort of drive this book so much. I couldn't imagine her spilling her guts in a book, even to herself. She's not going to talk about many of the things that had happened to her, particularly the biggest secret that she was holding, about sort of her early life. And so out of that necessity to sort of have someone tell the story, was Baruch came along, who's her husband, and he would have seen sort of the early stages of her young life, so he knew more about what had happened. And then it was really important for me, which actually the book started from the perspective of her daughter, who I really wanted to have her try to understand her mother as I was trying to understand my grandmother.
So I always love it when the author reads just a little bit from their book. And I had a bunch of different sections marked out, but honestly, is there some place that you feel like would give folks a good feel for?
Why don't I mean I'm happy to chat to read anything. Do you want to give me something to read? I'm happy to do that too.
Well, I kind of like the beginning of chapter 2, even about he this is her future husband is smitten with her and is coming to like kind of hang out all the time to get her attention. And
Oh yeah. Okay.
and it's just kind of nice because it's got a little bit of the dialogue, but even just that first section between until you get to I woke up the boys, I think that would be really sweet.
Okay. I'm just trying to find where you are.
Oh, okay, sorry. I have
no.
an edition where it's page 24, but I don't know which edition you're in. So
I know. Oh, okay.
So
Okay,
it's
that's
in
great. Now I
it's
got
in
it.
Marcia Garcia's voice.
Yeah,
So
same
okay.
page. Got it. He told me he would come and say goodbye, but he never showed up. I was embarrassed that I wanted to search for him, but when I found his cousin at the back of his vertical board house, he didn't seem at all surprised to see me. He tipped his axe over his narrow shoulder. He was much older than Farouk, looking more like an Amerindian than an East Indian, and not nearly as handsome. How come we never met before? He wanted to know. I don't know. I had seen him many times. You living just up the road there? He stepped closer. What's your family name? I offered the name, my father's name, that wouldn't pique his interest. Garcia. He stared as if there were a million more questions he would ask. Is Farouk here? I said quickly. He swung the axe into the fresh stump between us. My louse of a cousin, Farouk. These last 2 visits were the only times I remember him meeting him. Then I wake up this morning and he gone. Left behind some of his things too. Not a proper goodbye, a proper thank you, or nothing. He choops. I thought you would come. You must have scared him off pretty good. Me? Yeah, the fella took a real liking to you. He looked me over like I was a shaved ice cone on a hot day, and I see why.
Thank you. So this is what I love about this at the beginning of the book is it shows how she's timid about this courtship and where it might lead. And we don't know that much about her at this point, except that she's a young woman caring for 2 small children. And at face value, that's all we've got, And so the fact that she's being wooed by this police officer, this big, handsome dude, kind of comes off as being very suave at this point. I love it's like a naivety that comes across about her.
Yeah, she is very innocent. We do learn that about her later, even though it doesn't seem like it. She seems much more sophisticated, but there is an innocence to her, and a naivete that actually I think travels through the whole book until almost the end. I would say, even when she gets to America, there's like a freshness and a greenness about her that sort of allows a lot of things to happen that someone more sort of worldly and more sophisticated might have picked up on.
Yeah, definitely.
Immediately. So I think it makes her a far more sympathetic character as well. That she's so from a sheltered life, and she doesn't really see how much all the machinations happening. And there's a lot of machinations happening around her, right? There's the sort of the uncle who's sort of trying to be prime minister, who wants to keep her sort of hidden away, and there's Farouk who's trying to hide her away from his family because she's sort of an unacceptable spouse, and then the oldest daughter who's just a little bit of a troubled kid who's causing her an enormous amount of stress.
Well, they had their root chakras were taken away many times. They hadn't, very often they didn't have a home, or they were moving from one house to another. they weren't sure about where the food was going to come from or where the money was going to come from, although she had a steady business throughout the book in sewing. And I thought it was really sweet too, the way you had her son become the one with her talent rather than the other daughters. That was a nice little connection there for him. But I mean, like I said, I don't need to know what the true part is and what the not true part is. It's a story, but the issues about race in the Caribbean are huge, and so many Trinis or Bahamians, they're from all parts of the world, and some of them don't even realize where their backgrounds are from. And I think that's the fact that there can be so many people with so many different cultures inside them, and then they still have to be racist on top of that, makes me nuts. It's like, how can you not show love for your husband, your son's wife, when she's, has his children? I mean, how can you just ignore this?
Yeah, no, Brooke's mother is a piece of work, as I like to say. She's but I did really want, I mean, Trinidad is a real melting pot. I mean, when you think about and I wrote about this a little bit in my second novel, but you think about sort of the history of the island, sort of from indigenous people fighting off the Spaniards, to the Spaniards actually losing the island to the English. But during that time, the French are actually have taken over some of the sort of tilling of the land. So you have English, French, Spanish, indigenous people. Then they bring African slaves, and after slavery's ended, then they bring people from other places like India,
China,
as indentured servants. So you have all of this happening, and this was sort of in the course of 200, 300 years. So there's a lot of like intermixing, and a lot.
And it's one of the most further South Caribbean islands. So it's right up against Venezuela and the influence from there. So, my goodness, what a place, huh?
Yeah, it's a lot going on. And I really wanted to sort of to highlight sort of the cultural differences, but then all the sort of, unique trininess of these characters as well. But but the conflicts between sort of East Indians and East Indian people of East Indian descent and Black African descent, has always been there. It's always been present. Probably do a better job of it than on other islands, and sort of melding the two. But in moments of social social stratas, meeting, that's when it bubbles up to the surface. And Farouk bringing her, this sort of she hasn't finished school, she has no family name to speak of, she's raising these two boys that nobody knows anything about, and he thinks she's suitable, and his mother is definitely
incredulous. And not to mention the whole self-imposed caste system that they place on their own culture, which I'm sure she's at some level that she wishes she were higher,
Right.
So that's an incredible voice that you give out there. Let's talk a little bit about like how you developed the storyline. Was there, did you just kind of ask all your relatives and say, tell me what you know? Or were you sort of like, let me get the history first, because I don't really know that much about Trinidad yet, or maybe you did, or I don't know. I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, I think I started with what I knew about my grandmother's story first, right? And and there were just like key moments. So I knew that she was really unhappy with my grandfather. I knew that she left the kids behind, and eventually sort of, and came here to work as a domestic. I knew that this thing happened to her when she came to Maryland, where she worked for a family, and they were not kind to her, not to give anything away, but they were not kind to her at all. And she ends up leaving, essentially running away. She always called it running away. So she ran away from Maryland, ended up in New York, and that's sort of where she made her life. That's pretty much what I knew. And so I sort of built from there, and then I began sort of thinking about all the stories that my parents had told me that I thought I wasn't listening to. um, and they were actually surprised, I think, the first time they read my first draft, because they were like, how did you know this? And I was like, I think I listened to you all. I didn't realize I was listening, but so I put things, sort of, along the way. My dad was a police officer in Trinidad, so he really helped me with Farouk's sort of, the piece of the book, where Farouk is a cop, and there's a lot of sort of things going on with that. I could have written another 100 pages on that alone, so that was really fascinating to me.
I could almost see like a future book of like a murder mystery or something,
right?
Because your knowledge of this island has become so acute. It's like you could place all sorts of characters in there and
could do a lot. I could have done a lot. Yeah. It was my first book, so they were not trying to spend more than 400 pages on these.
Oh, no. You can have many, many books. I'm looking forward to reading many, many more of your books, Lauren. They're delicious.
So, but yeah, so I sort of started, it was like a tapestry, I sort of knew where it was going to begin and where it was going to end. And then I had to sort of place things in between. And I wanted the story to not just be about Carnival, right? I mean, when people think about Trinidad, they think so much about like this big party and that happens once a year. But I wanted to put Carnival in the back and really just focus on the life of this one woman, and all the sort of things about the country that made her want to leave, and things about the country that made it a place to still want to stay and to come home to. So yeah, there's a scene where she comes to New York for the first time, and she arrives, and I had a friend's father who sat with me and talked to me about that thing that happened to him, meeting someone on the train and I used his story for that, and it was really, really helpful for me to kind of get an idea of how horrific and terrifying it can be to show up in a place like New York City when you've grown up in in a rural
village
part of the world, right? Yeah. So he was very, very helpful for me there, and there's so many people to thank for that.
Yeah, I was going to say, and also that duality of, is she scamming them? Like when she comes to America and she's asking, she's worked up enough nerve to know she has to ask somebody for help, and this young man befriends her. It's like, is he scamming her? Is she scamming him? I mean, like, what's the story here? And then when he brings her home, thinking his mother would be so proud of him for helping out a Trini from the homeland, so to speak, she's aghast, and she's like, how could you bring her into this house? She's just gonna, rob us or something. It's like, oh my God, how can you not be more kind to each other? How discombobulating that all is.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think there were so many moments of sort of disappointments, but then there are bigger moments too. Just meeting him on the train was such a huge moment, and he sort of shepherds her a little bit to the next place.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, I agree with you. There and because we're so attached to her by that point, we know that she's not harmful. She's not going to. So so you're screaming at the person, going, no, she's a good person. Just help her out. So, but
that happens. Friends who have immigrated here, they used to call them ship cousins, because they all came, either on the same boat or in the same train, or, they came via someplace. And, I'll never forget, a friend of mine was from Iraq, and her husband was from Iran. And her parents were furious that she was going to marry somebody from Iran. And to us, it was like, what are you talking about? You're small countries, you're right next to each other. How could that be so weird? You're both from the same kind of families. I mean, but it's the same story with Farouk and Marcia. It's like, people don't understand that love is there, and it's going to forget that there's borders and religions and races, and, you know, and how different her life would have been if that family had just accepted her.
Yeah. Oh,
How completely different that life would have been.
Yeah. And her children
They've never come to the US.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So many small choices. And I mean, you know, when you're writing anything, you know, a novel in particular, you know, you're just taking small choices by small choices. Like you get to a scene and you know, and how can, you know, how can you ruin this character's life is pretty much what you're thinking, right? So even though it's very hard when you start to get emotionally attached to a character to keep dealing in blows, but you know,
Well,
life is such.
you have a gift, and I wanted to, I can't believe a half hour has gone by already. I'm shocked, but I wanted to open it up for questions. If anyone has any question, please unmute yourself and be civilized, and we'll each get a chance to ask. And anybody want to jump in? Because I have another query about what's next in the life of the author. What are you stirring up now, and when do we get to see it in print?
Should I answer or should I wait?
No, go ahead.
Oh, it's fine. Actually, my second book came out during the pandemic, if you can believe that, which is great. It was called Book of the Little Axe, and it's also a sort of Trinidad and America book, but it's set in the 1700s, and the late 1700s and early 1800s. So I sort of begin the novel right when the English take over the island from the Spanish, and what happens to this family. One of the daughters is pushed off the island, and she ends up living with the Crow Native Americans in Montana. It's bizarre as hell to think about how these things work, but it actually works. And another sort of intergenerational family story, which I clearly can't stop.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to reading that one next. That'll be my summer reading. You know, you and I first met through the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Festival. Will you be participating this year again?
No, I don't think so. Unless they might invite me, but I'm not here much of the summer, so I
okay.
I doubt it. Yeah.
Okay. Our guest, our honoree this year is Richard Powers, and I've been reading his work, Bewilderment and Overstory, and wow. I mean,
yeah. Wow, exactly.
It's going to be and we're going to try to do it. Well, we are intending to do it live in person at the Universal Unitarian Church of Rockville, which is got a beautiful sanctuary that has 3 walls of glass looking out on the trees. So for Richard Powers' work about trees and environment, it's going to be a sensational location. So hopefully,
try to make that. I can see
maybe you can come to that. It's nearby because you're local, right?
I am. Yeah, I'm in Kensington. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, we're so thrilled that you were here. Any other last minute questions? Everybody's being very thoughtful. I hope you'll go out and pick up Lauren's book, order it on Amazon or wherever you like to bookshop. I bet you even Friends of the Library have some copies. And it's just a beautiful read till the well runs dry. And I'm looking forward to reading Little Axes next.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you all so much. Enjoy the day.